Good evening, we're on the air. It's August 20th. Tonight's meeting is the Development Commission. First item of business tonight is a review and approval of minutes from May 7th. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Chair will entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
Move to approve. Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. Tonight we're having a public meeting. It's not a public hearing. It's a public meeting tonight, and then on the 3rd of September it'll be continued. And it's an effort to get information and understanding and to ask questions about the proposed Costco development plan. If you would like to comment or ask questions, I ask you to sign up on the sign-up sheet. And depending on how many we have signed up, we'll try to somewhat potentially curtail lengthy comments or discussions. Just get your points across. Ideally, like maybe 5 minutes of questions or comments, and then we'll move on. So the staff will start the project. Lucy?
Good evening. I first would like, I'm Lucy Sloman, Land Development Manager from DSD, and I'd like to introduce two other city staff people who may be helping answer questions this evening. Keith Niven, Economic Development Director, and Sheldon Lynn, Public Works Director. They may have some opening introductory comments. Okay.
Thank you, Lucy. As stated, my name is Sheldon Lynn. I'm the Public Works Director for the City of Issaquah. And before you is a meeting to discuss and be presented the Costco Development Agreement, land use, land plan, and the like. And as a piece of information, the schedule of this agreement and land plan is driven in part for reasons of financial aspects of trying to get some grant money from the state of Washington, in which the timelines and deadlines for those applications and information associated with it are the end of September. So just wanted you guys to be aware that the deadlines that are, or I should say the process schedule that's laid in front of you is a resultant of the city's need to acquire money from the state to help fund the major road improvements associated with the agreement. And so if there's other questions about that, I'm happy to answer them.
And I'm going to reserve, I talk a lot, so I'm going to try not to. And I'll reserve most of my 5 minutes for later, Mr. Chair. What I would like to do is, I haven't seen Lucy's presentation, so I don't want to kind of repeat anything that she is going to present to you guys. But one of the things that I think is of importance is that this development agreement, the property owner chose to work within the Central Issaquah Plan recently adopted standards as opposed to rezone to urban village like many of our other development agreements have done. So that's, I think, a very key point, and I want you guys to kind of keep that in the back of your mind as the presentation goes through, because that affects a lot of not only the content here, but how we looked at it as well.
For the people in attendance and those glued to their television at home, again, it's a public meeting. We're here to get information. We are not taking a vote tonight. On the September 3rd meeting, we are being asked to make a recommendation to council, and we won't do anything more till then. So you'll have a chance to speak tonight and in 2 weeks, and also to make written statements to the city as well. Thanks, Lucy. Go ahead.
Thank you. So as we've repeated numerous times, tonight we're here to talk about the land plan and the master site plan amendment for Costco. As the chairperson identified, next meeting, you will be asked to make a recommendation to council on 3 pieces. One is the land plan as part of the development agreement. Second is master site plan amendment to remove the master site plan from the Costco property. And third, by implication, the relevant elements of the development agreement. So I'm going to, tonight, that's really what my focus is to kind of review and frame the land plan and the staff report, to talk about the development agreement and the relevant elements, and to talk about the amendment to the master site plan. And I want to let you know that this is relatively informal, and my presentation is relatively long because this is a lot of material. So please feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go along. So I'm going to give you a little context. I think most of us know it, but it's always good to have sort of an introduction. This is the general area of the Pickering Place in which Costco's property is located. The yellow box highlights that Pickering Place in specific, although this is not the exact boundary. To the east is Issaquah Creek, major environmental element. To the north, we have significant roads to the north, as well as Lake Sammamish State Park. East Lake Sammamish Parkway is another significant roadway connecting to I-90. A more minor street is 221st Place. Of course, I-90 to the south, SR 900 to the west. And I also want to point out that although it is no longer part of Pickering Place, Pickering Barn is adjacent to all of this and is approximately in the location of the sort of smaller dotted box. The map on the left, the blue outline shows the actual boundary of Pickering Place with Costco's property in orange and salmon. Just to give you a couple of highlights of that, the numbered buildings here are the 3 existing office buildings, 1, 2, and 3 in the order in which they were occupied and built. The retail warehouse is up here. I put a giant X through this because since this aerial photo was taken, the wetland was removed and mitigated on adjacent property. And in the southeast area is the trading building, as well as, since this photo was taken, a 5-story parking garage that is either just completed or just about to be completed. So I'm just going to give you a few quick images. Many of these buildings are familiar, but just in case, I think it's good to know the buildings that are part of the Costco property. Of course, there's the warehouse, which I think many of us visit. Across the street is building number 2, which is one of their office buildings. Then building number 1, which is the first one they occupied. Number 4 is this new parking garage. You can see on kind of the right side the wetland here and located here that screens it from the road. Building 3 is the furthest to the south along Lake Drive and the newest building, and then the trade building. As Sheldon mentioned, one of the drivers for the development agreement is the Master Transportation Financing Agreement, or MTFA. So I just have 2 kind of introductory slides on the vehicular circulation because that is a big part of the development agreement. There are certain roads that are currently in place. Some are publicly owned, some are privately owned. For most of our purposes, that isn't really an important distinction. Probably of more interest are the new roads shown in green that will be added. There are other places, but this is the most significant one that will connect across Issaquah Creek to East Lake Sammamish and provide a more direct connection to I-90. So now I'm going to get sort of to the meat of the land plan. The structure of the presentation is around the chapters of the Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards, which is abbreviated as CIDDS, in contrast to CIP, which is the more policy type document. So The first chapter is the zoning uses and standards, and the current campus is located within the urban core zone. The development agreement would entitle Costco to an additional 1,500,000 square feet on top of the square footage they already have. This would predominantly be office uses, but up to 250,000 square feet could be used for retail or other employment-generating land uses. The new buildings, not the those in association with the warehouse, but primarily the office buildings, could be between 3 and 10 stories tall, which is consistent with the heights allowed by Central Issaquah. And this would meet the minimum FAR of 0.55. Did you have a question?
I had a question. You said employment generating, so it couldn't be residential?
Right, so that's an important point about the development agreement. Residential is allowed in the urban core zone. Costco could do residential if they chose to, but at this point, the traffic analysis has all been around retail and office. So there would need to be a bit of additional analysis associated with residential. We're completely supportive of them providing residential. It's just not quite all the analysis has been done to accommodate that.
Great, thanks.
Setbacks and build-to lines are also covered in Chapter 4, but they're also regulated by Chapter 11. I'm going to wait and talk about it in that section. Density bonus is in Chapter 5. The proposal potentially could exceed the base height of 48 feet. And so the proposal provides a combination of land dedication, TDRs, and payment to address density bonus requirements. Chapter 6, as I said, roads are a big part of this, and so there are several points I'd like to make around circulation facilities associated with this proposal. One is that in the Central Issaquah standards, it shows the streets within Pickering Place as being core streets. The development agreement incorporates a modification or adjustment in the lingo of the Central Issaquah standards to the core street standard. And there are 3 aspects of it that are being proposed to be modified. And I've listed them, but you can also kind of see them in this table down here. One is that sidewalks are proposed to be reduced by 2 feet, from 8 feet to 6 feet. On-street parking is eliminated, and a center turn lane is added. So here's some of the thinking behind that. When you read the description of core streets, it assumes that the buildings will be set at the back of sidewalk, and that's and between the location of the buildings and the types of uses that are anticipated in the urban core, the streets were wider. However, Central Issaquah also acknowledges that for office uses, it may be necessary for security and privacy reasons that buildings be set back from the sidewalk, and Costco has proposed to do that. And so we feel that the 8 feet is not as necessary in that circumstance. In terms of the on-street parking, that was long discussion. We really value on-street parking. At the same time, we're trying to fit an adopted standard into a site with existing buildings and facilities, and also keep the streets narrow. And we were, Costco's traffic consultant identified that given the traffic patterns, the use of under-building parking, that it would be necessary to have a center turn lane. And in doing so, in addition to the on-street parking, the streets began to get quite wide. So that was the suite of adjustments that are proposed within the development agreement for streets. And I just want to note that 6 feet is fairly standard sidewalk width for other streets within Central Issaquah, so it's not narrower than streets elsewhere in the circulation facility standards. And the bicycle lanes will help make a more complete bicycle circulation system within Pickering Place. In terms of how these improvements will be constructed, they will happen incrementally in phases as various buildings are completed. That is being worked out, still being negotiated with Costco, and will be located in the Master Transportation Financing Agreement. Okay. So there's a condition number 2 in the staff report relates to the incremental construction. The incremental implementation of the entitlement will include completing the pedestrian circulation system, including sidewalks on both sides of the roads, consistent with the improvements shown in the MTFA Development Agreement Exhibit H. However, during future land use and/or construction permit review, the applicant may request an administrative adjustment of standards consistent with the provisions and procedures of the CIDDS. Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm going to make sure I understood the last, go to the next slide, this. So the incremental or the phased implementation is what this is referring to of the project, and so it's talking specifically about, you know, the kind of the improvements related to the roads and sidewalks, et cetera. And I was thinking about, are there other public amenities that the timing is going to be important depending upon how the project phases, and should those amenities be identified and implementation timing be prescriptive and maybe a little less? Again, since this is very high-level conceptual design at this point, but it seems that that's going to be an important factor, I think, in how phase development happens, so that it makes sense and so that some of those amenities are brought online as the project moves ahead when it comes to the public amenities.
Okay. And you're thinking of the public amenities, not necessarily the public amenities in association with the streets?
Yes.
Okay, great. I just wanted,
plazas, or
right.
things like that. Yeah.
Okay, and I'll touch on that when I get to community space. I hadn't thought about that. That's a great question.
Thank you.
The second piece of the Chapter 6 circulation facilities I wanted to touch on was block length. A big part of Central Issaquah is to try and create a very pedestrian-friendly, fine-grained pedestrian network. And that's somewhat of a challenge in this area. For the office area, we have existing shared use routes, which include the Pickering Trail between Issaquah Creek and the buildings, which exists now, and the Pickering Pond Trail, both of which are shown as shared use routes in Central Issaquah's plan and standards. There will also, there either are or will be these sidewalks along streets as part of that standard. So in a sort of north-south section or north-south orientation, we have our pedestrian and bike facilities at about the frequency that's anticipated by Central Issaquah. But as we look at east-west connections, you can see that there's not going to be a lot of through streets because between the pond and the creek, it's just relatively difficult and maybe not even appropriate to make the kind of frequency of connections that the plan anticipates. And so part of our discussion was to look at, well, how can we provide regular connections between the street, Lake Drive, and these two trail systems, shared use routes that already exist? So obviously we can connect between buildings, such as shown in these kind of longer dashed lines and along here as well. However, those connections are not quite at the frequency that was anticipated in Central Issaquah. So part of our discussion with Costco was around how to get a frequency that's consistent with the standards. And one of the solutions that we came up with was to provide connections through the building. Now those could be arcades, and arcades might be, if you think of that as like a open ground floor passageway, those could be open to the public. But they could just as much be an atrium or some other kind of facility that wasn't open to the public. Costco does maintain a secure campus, and their buildings would not be generally open for the public. So we had to discuss the implications of that. One of the things, I think there were a couple of factors that made us comfortable with using this tool in this circumstance. I don't think it would work in many other, if any other places of central Issaquah. And that is allowing the through building connections to stand in for more open, publicly accessible routes. Part of that is because even with the street system connected out to East Lake Sammamish with the new road down here, we still think that the majority of people that will be in this area and that would be connecting between the road and the trail will be Costco employees and their visitors, and they have passes that would allow them to use the building. And we're also, as I said, not going to have a street grid that connects in the same way that it does in the rest of central Issaquah. So we feel that the frequency and ability for the majority of people to make these regular connections meets the intent of central Issaquah. In the warehouse block, it's really a super block. It's about 600 by 1,000 feet, which is significantly larger than is anticipated in central Issaquah. But the reality is that as long as the warehouse and the surface parking occupies that block, it really isn't possible to break it down into the kind of fine-grained grid that central Issaquah envisioned when and if that block is redeveloped. So at this time, the pedestrian circulation through that block is really, I think, almost complete system of, there's a route along the front of the store that connects from Sammamish down to Lake Drive. And then there's also another route that connects between 10th and 11th along here. Any questions before I go on? So there's a really long condition associated with this. Incrementally, sure.
Since we're
Yeah.
kind of do this in an informal approach. So what you just described as far as trying to, the cross-block connections or mid-block connections and connections to the trails, et cetera, and the point that you said, well, most of the people here will be Costco employees, and so that should be fine. And so I guess a little bit of concern about that, because what it starts to feel like is if you're not a Costco employee, you're not welcome here. And this is a part of the city that we want to invite people to. And so my thinking is, what are the things that we're doing with this project or with this development agreement that would actually bring other people to this part of the city to enjoy the features that the city provides? There's a trail. The city's going to have roads, sidewalks. It's going to be landscaping. There's a pond. There's a number of things that people could come to enjoy. But if it starts to feel like, well, this is Costco's space, don't come here, and I don't think that's what the corporation wants to have happen either. But it seems like some thought needs to be given to making it inviting for all, not just for people that work in those buildings.
So let me just remind you, because it's been a while since we've done this and it is something of a new process. As we go through this evening and we receive questions and comments and concerns from the commission and the public, we will prepare, we're writing these down, and we prepare a briefing response memo. So sometimes we have answers this evening, and sometimes it's best to, sort of think it through and give you a more concise answer. So I made some notes, and we'll include that in the briefing response memo.
So he's kind of spurred me on to thinking, I just want to make sure I understand the through block passages are really public accesses, but the through building things, that the expectation would be that those are probably not open to the public, that they're secure for the Costco employees. Is that correct?
So these ones that, like this
Right.
one
Right.
and this one, those are outside.
Right. Okay.
So it's these sort of lighter or shorter dash lines that would go through the building. So it's kind of every other. Now, this is a concept. We're not saying it's going to be built exactly like this, but this is the kind of framework that we reviewed this, assuming we could achieve this. So here's the condition. Incrementally build a connected pedestrian system between Lake Drive and the shared use routes behind the buildings, Pickering Trail and Pickering Pond Trail, consistent with the intent of section 6.2.A. If the buildings are longer than 300 feet, open-air arcades, enclosed through building atriums, or elements that serve a similar purpose will be provided to implement the block length requirements of section 6.2.A. The land plan was evaluated and approved with the following level of connectivity being determined to be consistent with the intent of section 6.2.A at approximately the frequency shown in the staff report illustration. 1, outside through block passages between buildings, and 2, internal building passageways via main entrances from street-side plazas and trail-side plazas, which will have access limited to Costco employees and invited guests. However, the staff report illustration is a concept and will likely not be constructed exactly as shown. Entries into and exits from the buildings to the plazas may not be internally connected via a straight line, though the route through the buildings should be direct and comprehensible for Costco employees. So the third element associated with the circulation facilities chapter are sky bridges, which we've placed under additional facilities, which is a section in that chapter. However, sky bridges are not listed under additional facilities. That's a new element to Central Issaquah. Costco currently has 2. One is located here and one is located here. In considering the use of sky bridges and continuing those, staff's thought was that we need to be respectful of the secure campus complex that Costco has, and yet we want a frequent pedestrian external system that connects between the trails and the street. If we didn't allow sky bridges, then we would likely have more monolithic buildings that would not allow that frequency of connection. And the sky bridges seem like a good balance between acknowledging their need for a secure campus and providing these between building connections at ground level. If you read the transmittal along with all the other many pages we sent you, you may be aware that there was a draft development agreement online. It was from July 7th. Next week there will be an updated version of the development agreement that will be available, and I assume you'll be sent a link to that. That contains, ever since that draft from July 7th came out, we've been continuing to negotiate and work through issues. And one of the things that we've talked a lot about are sky bridges. I'm not going to list all the different criteria that are in there, but there were a couple of pieces I just wanted to provide to you. One was that there could be one sky bridge between each pair of buildings, which is what is shown on the land plan to the right and kind of circled with little yellow ovals, and that there could be 2 sky bridges crossing the right-of-way. And the rest of the criteria are really around design, and I won't read those to you. You can see them in the development agreement next week. And there was a condition associated with sky bridges as well. In addition to the review criteria and standards in Development Agreement Section 12, the design and review of sky bridges will use the images and captions provided under Chapter 6 of the staff report and in the imagery, staff report attachment 4, as illustrative guidelines. So Chapter 7 is community spaces. There are 4 community spaces associated as shown on the plan, and there's one associated with each building. What the land plan really identifies is the location of the community space, that would be provided with each building. It indicates that it meets the minimum size. And in thinking about your question, Mike, it would be, those are required in association with those buildings, so the timing would be associated with the construction of the building. But there may be other amenities that come up over the course of the evening, so please identify those. The other thing that the land plan shows about community spaces is that a lot of or all of the existing spaces, such as the amphitheater and such, are being maintained as part of the plan going forward. Parking. I'm going to look at this kind of in association with each use. For the office parking, the garage, which has already been constructed and has 5 floors located over here, is one of the primary ways that they're parking the project. The plan also includes the addition of 2 more floors for a total of 7 floors in the parking structure, which has been designed to accommodate that. Each of the new buildings, 4A, 4B, 5, and 6, each have under-building parking shown, 1 to 2 levels. The parking in front of buildings 1 and 2 remain. Since these buildings aren't being changed, they aren't being required to modify those. There is a small surface lot, a new small surface lot being proposed over here. Overall, the parking associated with the office falls between the minimum and maximum range, and really implements a big part of the vision of Central Issaquah by eliminating the use of surface parking and moving towards structured parking as the way to address parking needs with uses going forward. The warehouse is, because it isn't really being significantly changed, it may have some expansions. It is continuing to rely on surface parking. If and when it's redeveloped, that might change. There is one adjustment in the development agreement that I want to point out to you, and it's a size of parking stalls versus a maximum ratio. In the development, in Central Issaquah standards, the standard parking stall is 18.5 by 9 feet. Costco is asked to be able to have a parking stall 10 by 20 feet. And we were willing to do that because we recognize that loading the amount and size of material that often comes out of the store necessitates being able to get between cars, and we understand that need. Costco also asked to be able to exceed the maximum and continue to use 5 stalls per 1,000 square feet. In thinking about this, we said, if you want to do the 5 per 1,000 stalls, you'll need to use the standard Central Issaquah stall size. If you want to have 4 per 1,000 stalls, you can use the 10 by 20 foot stall size. And what this is basically is a wash in terms of impervious surface. So we'd have a little more parking stalls or a little larger parking stalls. The amount of impervious surface associated with each of them would be fairly consistent.
Does that change anything required to the number of stalls per business that we talk about routinely?
Well, this
In other
is
words-
only for the warehouse, so for the Costco warehouse.
Understood, but I mean, with the size of that building, they're supposed to have X number of stalls.
Yes.
Does this change that? I mean,
It
are
does
we
not-
gonna?
It does not change the minimum. It could potentially change the maximum. For a building of that size, the maximum ratio would be 4 stalls per 1,000 square feet of store. And so
Right.
they can decide if they want to go up to 5 per 1,000, which is not normally allowed for a store this size, they would have to use the smaller stall sizes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. Landscape. When I was writing the staff report, I kind of focused on that there's not a lot of detail at this kind of high conceptual level about landscape. But when I was working on this presentation, I began to kind of rethink that a little bit. There are 4 topics that are covered in this chapter. Landscaping for streets, landscaping for parking lots, landscaping for community spaces, and tree retention and protection. I realized that on the street trees and planting strip parking, there's already a lot of that there. Some of it may change as streets are incrementally rebuilt, but that's a relatively prescriptive standard. I mean, there's certain kinds of trees provided every 30 feet, and so without knowing, having pictures or specific drawings, we still have a pretty good sense of what that might look like and feel like. And same with parking lots. There's, you have to have 10% landscaping and 1 tree per 6 stalls, et cetera, and that's a relatively prescriptive standard that would be used for any changes or additions to the warehouse parking lots, since there aren't any really parking lots with the office buildings. So the 2 that we have a little bit less information about, one is the community spaces. However, if you've looked at the imagery, and I'm sure Steve Bullock from Mulvaney G2 will speak to this tonight, there are images included in the packet that you received, kind of indicating the sort of character and feel of the plazas that they imagine doing, as well as the plazas that they already have. And tree retention, again, is a relatively prescriptive process. They will either meet the tree retention requirements for the parking lots, because that's what they're predominantly taking out. They're not taking out big fields of grass and trees. Or they can apply for an adjustment of standards using the criteria that are set up in the Central Issaquah standards. So there's no change associated with that. So here's a meaty one. Chapter 11 is site design. You may remember when we were looking at Chapter 4, I mentioned that setbacks and build-to lines, that we were going to talk about it later. In Chapter 11 are many of the requirements for setbacks, street walls, build-to lines. There are Central Issaquah establishes some very specific requirements. You can go up right behind the sidewalk or right up to the property line. The most you can set back is 10 feet. You have to have 75% of a parcel or block with a street wall, etc. In looking, one of the advantages of looking at a piece of property with the standards is really understanding how do those 2 things work together. And we recognized in looking at the Costco property that there were several challenges. One is that Central Issaquah, either as it is built now or as it is intended to build out, will have a relatively rectilinear or geometric street grid. That is not the nature of the streets that were built with Pickering Place. Also, we don't really see relocating the streets to try and force a street grid onto this, given the number of buildings and facilities that have already been built. The street network can't really be connected, as I mentioned, with the creek and the pond, so you don't end up with blocks that make it easy to apply these sort of prescriptive standards about street walls. And we also discovered that there really aren't parcels. For instance, all the buildings all the property through here is on one big parcel. So it became difficult to kind of imagine how we would meet those requirements without having kind of continuous curvilinear buildings, which, although they proposed one curvilinear building, it did seem like a lot to assume that every single building would be built that way. So instead, what we are proposing is to meet the intent of these, as opposed to, so meet them more as a performance standard than a prescriptive standard. And that would be by creating street walls to the extent that it's practical and feasible, to provide frequent, consistent, strong edges to the public realm, and that community spaces and buildings be built to complement each other and to reinforce the street. I thought before I went on to the condition, I'd give you a chance if you had any questions or thoughts. Okay. So the image on the right is the red indicates some of the places, this is in the staff report, and indicates some of the refinements to the land plan that we would anticipate to comply with that kind of intent. Staff report condition number 4 is really long, so I don't think I'm going to read it to you. But the intent is to really establish, is to capture that intent so it's predictable for both Costco and city staff and the commission going forward. Buildings. I know with the last permit that came before you, you know, a big part of your review and interest and concern is the character of the buildings. We don't have specific building designs. However, we have 6 existing buildings, and we also have the imagery that's been provided to you that begins to capture the kind of materials, detailing, design that Costco has used in the past and intends to use going forward. So from staff's perspective, that we thought set a good sort of threshold for moving forward and having a clear understanding, shared understanding of what buildings would be like. There was one element in the land plan that we did want to clarify, and that was around entries. The red ovals indicate where the land plan shows that entries might be. And we're agreeing that entries in those general locations would meet the intent of Central Issaquah, along with either potentially an arcade, which is what those dashed lines indicate, or a employee-only entrance off of Lake Drive, so that there's kind of this axial terminus at Building 6 would have a door or something kind of welcoming, even if it was not available to the general public. So the condition associated with that, number 5, reads, each new building shall provide a primary entry into the building from the street, though security may limit who enters the building. Building 6 may have its public entry from the Pondside Plaza consistent with the CIDDS. However, a staff-only entry shall be placed on Lake Drive and positioned and designed to reinforce the vista and communicate that it is a primary building entry, unless an arcade is provided approximately as suggested in the land plan. Building 1's entry route from the street to the door shall be reasonably redesigned during the future land use and construction permitting process for Building 6 to make the sequence consistent with the Central Issaquah design and development standards as practical and reasonable. Let me just touch on that last one. I didn't mention that. This is Building 1, and currently, and its entrance is over here. And so you can see that this area is being changed, which would potentially impact the entry into Building 1. And we're just indicating that additional design and review would be necessary to make sure that the entry sequence complies with the Central Issaquah standards. So that's the land plan. Absolutely. The condition or the,
One picture of it.
okay.
So just thinking about what we're trying to accomplish, because the idea of the plan was to pull the buildings, pull the buildings out toward the street, create an interesting experience for pedestrians, we got kids going on in buildings, and look at coffee, ice cream, whatever. That's not happening here, so we're trying to figure out how do we accomplish the new intent of the plan, making it an interesting place to be as a pedestrian would go there. So, and I'm looking at, and I understand the challenge that you described, and looking at this, and I know this is still relatively conceptual, and this stuff was more over the years. 30-year plan. But just a couple of elements that jump out at me a little bit here is I like the idea of connecting those public spaces at the two red dots at the lower part. But as you move up, we've got a parking lot now that's right up on the street. That's kind of not exactly what we're looking for. And is there some way that we can create a different experience along that edge that's maybe not parking, try to do something that moves that away or does something along that frontage? Because right across from that's a plaza, so you have this, or an entry plaza. But right across, you've got what is a suburban surface parking lot, and that's not what we're looking for. So these are some observations and trying to understand the intent and how we're trying to meet that with the challenges you're facing. Also, the pedestrian bridges, and I think we're probably going to talk more about this, that's a lot of pulling the pedestrians up off the ground and running them across at second story level. It pulls all of that activity up off the street. So particularly those that cross the public road. So I wonder if that's the right solution at that level of connectivity through pedestrian bridges, through all of the buildings. Essentially, you could enter one of these buildings and not leave campus or walk across all over campus here without leaving a building. And I'm not quite sure that's an outcome that's going to be what we're looking for. So just a concern based on the extensive use of pedestrian bridges on this plan.
Great. So the second piece I wanted to touch on was the development agreement. This is a new thing to the Development Commission. Most of the ones have gone through the Urban Village Development Commission, so I want to provide a little bit of introduction and then walk you through some of the components of the development agreement. So the purpose of this development agreement is, reduced, probably overly reductionist, is to identify this entitlement and the requirements that come along with making that work. And two of the big ones, I wouldn't say they're the only ones, but two of the big ones are the Master Transportation Financing Agreement. So all the roads that are necessary to be able to build the 1.5 million square feet. And you'll hear me talk a lot about the MTFA in a minute. And then the land plan, which is the piece that you're looking at. So let me talk a little bit more about those. What is your role in looking then at the development agreement? So we are not asking you to do the kind of technical review that would be necessary to look at the MTFA. That is primarily council financing, public works financing, and transportation analysis document. You're of course welcome to give us comments on it, but that isn't an expectation that you have the expertise and understanding to dig into the MTFA. And unlike many of the urban village development agreements, Issaquah Highlands, Talus, Raleigh, et cetera, this development agreement really relies on Central Issaquah Plan and Central Issaquah Standards. So those documents are enormous because they are creating their own goals, guidelines, and standards for going forward. This document, this development and this entitlement is implementing the Central Issaquah Plan and Standards. So then what are we asking you to do? One thing is to do the kind of planning review that the Development Commission does. You look at the land plan and you provide us comments based on the Central Issaquah Plan and Standards, just like any other land use permit you review. Also, as part of a land use permit, you are often looking at the kind of adjustments and interpretations that staff apply when they're looking at an actual piece of property with the standards applied to it. In addition, Central Issaquah anticipated that a certain level of flexibility would need to be used in the methods, but not in the objectives. So part of what we're asking is that you look at the adjustments and interpretations that we've provided and give us feedback on whether you think those are appropriate ones. And you're then, of course, welcome to comment on anything else that's in the development agreement. But those are really the pieces that are of particular interest and importance to us to hear from you on. So now what I'm going to do is run through some of the adjustments and interpretations that we've done. You've heard most of them through the staff report, but I just want to really call these out so that they're clear to you. The first one is the floor area ratio, or FAR, how it was applied to this project. One of the challenges that comes with does everyone know what an FAR is? Okay. Floor area ratio, there's a certain minimum and a maximum floor area ratio that the Central Issaquah standards establish. And we're looking at a project that's going to be phased in over a number of years on a single piece of property. So how do you know, when do you get to that minimum? How do you know if you're getting enough? So what we wanted was to create a level of predictability up front. And so what we've looked at is the property that they're proposing to develop and the total build out, the 1.5 million square feet, as well as the existing buildings that exist on that property, and whether they meet it at build out. We are not proposing to look at it at an incremental level throughout the build out period. So that's the first interpretation. The second is density bonus. It's a relatively similar issue. They are exceeding the base height, which would trigger the need to provide density bonus. We have run a number of scenarios for how they might build out the property and might phase it and have arrived at a certain amount of square footage that would, as an average between these various scenarios, be above the base height, and have used that as the basis for calculating density bonus. And they're providing land and money as part of that, consistent with Chapter 5. Setbacks and build-to line. There isn't an interpretation that's included in the development agreement. It's in the staff report. It's the one I've already talked to you about, but it's referenced in the development agreement, so I just wanted to identify that since it is in the document. The document references the staff report.
Sorry, Lucy, if I can back up just 1 second.
Absolutely.
So that calculation of the, if I understand it correctly, it was 1.25 million in cash. This is back to the density bonus.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I just want to make sure I had this right. Is it plus 167,000 square feet of open space?
I'm going to
Or-
let Keith, is that right?
That's right.
Okay, it's those two things that they provide.
So, so we actually, the version that's the second version 2.0, after we wrote that up, we think that's the way that it's going to get accomplished. But basically, what the CIP allows for is basically the first third of the area above 4 stories needs to be paid for by cash. The second 2/3, or the other 2/3, the remaining 2/3, can be either satisfied with an additional cash payment, or the provision of open space, or the provision of affordable housing, or TDRs. And the only thing that's not kind of under consideration right now by Costco is affordable housing, because they're really not anticipating housing at this point as part of the development agreement. So what it's going to say is that they will provide some combination of either money, open space, or TDRs to satisfy that second 2/3. But at the end of the day, they will basically compensate for 250,000 square feet of office space above 4 stories. That's kind of where we landed.
Thank you.
So setbacks and build-to were in the staff report, and we already covered those. Another one was the adjustment to the core street standard, which again, we covered in the staff report, but the actual standard is captured in the development agreement, so I just wanted to identify that. corporate ID signs. There aren't any signs in the land plan, so this didn't come up, but I just want to identify it as an adjustment, which is included in the development agreement. Right now, a building of whatever height can have a wall sign up to 65 feet in height. A corporate ID sign is for a significant employer, motel or hotel or hospital. And for a significant employer, you would have to have a 10-story building to have a corporate ID sign. Costco is asked to have one corporate ID sign that they could have on one of their buildings, but that was between the 65 and the 10 stories, which is essentially the maximum height. So it would, the adjustment is that you wouldn't have to be 10 stories tall, but you would only get one if it was less than 10 stories. Another interpretation had to do with the warehouse parking lot lights. Their lights are taller than are allowed by Central Issaquah and standards, and so the question was, at what point do they have to bring them into compliance with the shorter pole heights? The challenge isn't the shorter poles, it's having to rewire and relocate everything in the parking lot to reach the lighting levels. And so there's, you'll see it in the new development agreement, they can continue to use a certain number of these lights until 50% of the parking lot is changed, and then they will bring that into compliance.
Lucy, can I just add one clarification? So as Lucy is putting up this list and it's saying adjustment or interpretation, I just want to be clear with you folks that right now the development agreement's not done, obviously, so these are proposed. So this is, what we're doing is we're inviting a conversation with you guys on these things. So if you feel like we drew the line in the wrong spot, let's talk about that and see, if it needs some additional thinking on our part.
I guess the question, do you want all our comments now, or if we have some ideas on that at the end?
You can certainly do it now, so if you don't have to remember it, but if you want to wait till the end, I'm fine too. I'll take them whenever you want to give them.
Great. No, I can. I'll remember.
I bet. There's the retail warehouse stall sizes versus the maximum parking ratio, which we already talked about. And then the ability to use sky bridges, which is we consider an interpretation. So the other piece of the development agreement, just to kind of give you a well-rounded understanding, hopefully, there were certain elements in the development agreement that we thought might be of interest to you. They don't directly bear on your review, but we thought that they sort of relate to some of the things that you think about. The entitlement piece, we already covered that residential would require some additional review to be allowed. Second is expansion areas. I have a map on the next slide, but I just want to note that the expansion areas are not all in the urban core. Some of them are in the mixed-use zone.
I'm sorry to interrupt again.
No, that's no.
Because again, back to the employment, 250,000 of employment-oriented uses. Because when I look at the development agreement, it just says 250,000 may be utilized for non-office uses. And I don't remember reading employment-oriented in the development agreement itself. Is that
We're very annoying that way that we keep writing. That's the language that we settled on, because the non-office uses would have allowed residential, and we hadn't done the traffic analysis that would be necessary. So that was a clarification
So
that will show up.
2.0, it's the,
Yes.
great. Okay.
That's a 2.0.
Thank you.
So expansion areas.
Maybe before you go through
Yeah.
that, I'm back to the FAR, if you can drop back to
sure.
that. Included in the package you sent us was this FAR calculation sheet, and I got confused with the outline of the property. I didn't understand what that was, why that particular picture, because it includes an awful lot of stuff that isn't Costco property. Yeah, that's the one right there. You just passed it.
It's a similar map, but I think.
That's it right there. Yeah. And I got confused as to what you were trying to tell us with this picture in regards to FAR calculations.
Right. So, the Costco property is this peach and orange.
Right.
So the,
I didn't know why the rest of it was there. I don't know why you had that maybe it's just me, but I didn't know why you had to have that stuff, the whole boundary in place. I got confused.
so I'll tell you, I didn't draw this, but
Okay.
I'm not picking on the person who did. I think they were using a standard graphic that they had used elsewhere that just showed Costco's property relative to other properties in the area, but
Okay, but so all you're talking about with this graph is just the brown or the orange or whatever the color that's okay, thank you.
yep. So, expansion areas. The white are the expansion areas that Costco has proposed. The red, yeah, it shows up. So the red is their existing boundary, and the white are the areas that they have proposed as potential expansion areas. But and this again is in version 2.0, that we realized that if they brought in all 248 acres, they would not meet the minimum FAR. So they are restricted to 45 acres of additional land that could be brought in without additional review to ensure that we would meet the minimum FAR.
I think we'll wait on the public until after you're done.
Okay. Vested rights. By this I mean that the Central Issaquah plan and standards that are in place at this time will be the plan and standards used for the term of the development agreement. This is something that's allowed by the state regulations and has been very commonly done in the other development agreements, but it is one of the questions that Connie raised in her letter. Permit processing. I don't think this is in, I'm not sure which version was in 1.0, but I know in 2.0, most of the permit processing is the same as was adopted in Central Issaquah. The one difference is that as they bring in the building, since you've reviewed the land plan and made a recommendation on it, as they bring in the actual buildings, they will do a land use permit. If the building is over 150,000 square feet, it will come back to the Development Commission, but it'll be more like a community conference rather than a decision. So that's the proposal right now.
Is it also true then that a building that's shown on here, 10 stories tall, there would be no public hearing on it, either community conference or just open hearing?
No, if they brought in one of these office buildings, whether if it was over 150,000 square feet, because you may remember under 150,000 is automatically administrative in Central Issaquah. So if it's over 150,000 square feet, sorry, turn it off. On the top button, that's fine, sorry. If it's over 150,000 square feet, it would come back to the commission, to you guys, for input from you and the public, but the decision would be made administratively. So we're getting the input, but it's not a commission decision.
Is that for any building or just ones not shown on the land plan?
Only for the ones shown on the land plan because you have already had a chance to comment on them. if building, and thank you for asking that, for buildings over 150,000 square feet that are not shown on the land plan, they would go through this standard process. So it's only the ones that you have had a chance to look at through this process.
But they both get a public hearing. It's
You would get a more like a public meeting or
Right,
community
yeah.
conference.
a chance for public input.
Yes, but you would actually have a public hearing for, if it wasn't shown on the land plan, it would go through the standard process, which would include a public hearing.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
The term of the development agreement is 30 years. So the components, they would have an opportunity to build out their buildings and use the regulations for that period of time. I also just wanted to point this out because this is something that's common in other development agreements, but which you may not have run across before, which is that along with the administrative adjustment of standards, if there is a request by Costco to change certain things, it has to go back to council. So there's a list of sort of, the name keeps changing, major modifications, council amendments, something like that, but it's in the development agreement, and it's a list of things that if those are being changed, like if they want to use a use that's not listed in urban core, if they want to change the MTFA, if they want to change things associated with the FAR, they would have to actually go to council to be able to do those. So that's sort of an overview of the development agreement. Another piece that you're being asked to comment or make a recommendation on is the master site plan amendment. So why is Costco asking for this amendment? When the council passed Central Issaquah plan and Central Issaquah standards, to be able to use those, Costco or anyone in Pickering Place cannot develop really under the master site plan because there's kind of two different approaches. The height limits are significantly lower, the impervious surface is significantly lower, the parking is significantly higher, as three examples. So to be able to take advantage of the Central Issaquah approach, they are asking to eliminate the master site plan on their properties. One of Connie's questions was, what is the city giving up through that? Generally speaking, since the city in 2012 and 2013 adopted the two pieces of Central Issaquah, we feel like that was a decision that was already made. There was zoning and all kinds of things that existed in this area, and the council has already made a decision to move in this direction and to apply that zoning and those standards to this property. And so we have not really focused on what the elements of the master site plan are because of the change in zoning. There are another piece of some of, yeah.
Lucy, can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
So the other properties that are covered by, and I don't know if it's on a map here, I miss if it is, for the master site plan, if other properties that are covered by that plan ask to have the plan eliminated from their properties to apply the Central Issaquah plan, which is the more contemporary planning of the city, would that be, I know you're not the decision maker on it, but would that be something the city would promote? Because essentially the master site plan for this particular area was essentially done years ago under a different set of
Right.
standards and guidance by the council
Right.
and their policy.
Right. I mean, for the same reason, so that master site plan is from 1987, and so we generally consider removing the master site plan from any of the properties in Pickering Place to be kind of a housekeeping matter, because that zoning and those standards have been applied. There's a certain process that they would have to go through.
Right.
But it's not like you would have to do a development agreement to be able to have that, and we're talking about whether the development agreement can simplify the process, since to remove the master site plan for the city's purposes. Now, there's all kinds of CCNRs and private property agreements, which the city is not a party to. But relative to the master site plan permit, which was approved by the city in 1987, we view this just as a housekeeping matter to eliminate that to allow Central Issaquah to move forward.
Right.
And that would be true for any of the properties.
Okay.
And just to be clear, since the council hasn't acted on that yet,
Right.
we're assuming that's the way that's going to go down, but
Right.
that's part of the decision that is going to run hand in hand with this development agreement, is asking the council to remove Costco from the master site plan provisions of Pickering.
Right. So when I say these things, I'm just describing staff's position.
Okay. I got a question. So we have this master plan that's set in place, and I guess I'm kind of baffled why this project is coming up to Development Commission for this amendment. It would seem to me that you probably want to go to whoever approved the master plan to make this adjustment and not come to the Development Commission. And I don't want to sound real bureaucratic about this because it's going to take a long time to go through this. But a lot of effort was put in to have this master plan approved. Everybody agreed to it. All the folks were, and I presume, it went through a lot of hearing and stuff like that to have it approved. So now you're making an exception, and all of a sudden, Development Commission is asked to come up with a yay or no and some amendment. So I guess I'm kind of questioning why are we going through this route this way? And, there's a lot of things that, we're kind of agreeing to narrow the sidewalk and, the street or this and that and parking lot. There's a lot of thoughts that went into it, and I have to give them credit for coming up with that. And to make the change now, it just, I just feel uncomfortable about, what I'm seeing so far. And again, the point that Mr. Barrett made was, I don't see any Issaquah folks being incorporated into this master plan. So it raises a flag to me.
Okay. So the council was the body that approved the master site plan in 1987, and the council would be the body to eliminate it. I'm not sure. I know I wasn't around in 1987 working on this, and I don't know whether any of you were around. I want to kind of make a distinction between two pieces. There's how Pickering Place developed under the master site plan, and then there is the approach that was applied to all of Central Issaquah with the new Central Issaquah Plan and Standards. This proposal is looking at how to work with the existing pieces to bring them more fully into compliance with the new Central Issaquah standards. When, for instance, I mentioned that the sidewalk would be narrower, that's not compared to the sidewalk that is in existence is, I'm going to guess, 5 feet wide, which is narrower than the reduced standard that we're proposing. So there's what's actually on the ground, because the street standard that was used to build Pickering Place is different than the street standard that's in Central Issaquah.
Can I try?
Yeah.
So the master site plan was kind of it was the ancestor of development agreements. So basically, the state legislature created the development agreement to basically standardize what localities were using to do these kind of contract rezones. And so the issue we have with the Pickering master site plan is it has no termination point. And so, these development agreements, we talk about years, like, let's do this for 30 years. But at the end of that time, basically the rights that are conveyed through that agreement don't have quite the same standing as the rights in Pickering. So the city attorney has said that basically, you know, you can think about it almost as a land use right. The master site plan is if you owned land within the Pickering Place master site plan area. And so the city can't relinquish those rights. Well, we could, but we don't want to necessarily get rid of any rights that might have been conveyed through the master site plan approval. So what we're doing is we're allowing the property owners within Pickering to elect to redevelop their property and be kind of managed under the new CIP standards, but it takes their asking to do that. That's at least the opinion at this point of the city attorney. And so the difference is, I guess what I'm saying is, if you were anywhere else in the city and you developed your property and the city council put new zoning on your property, those standards would apply to your property. The reason why this is a little bit different is because there was no termination date on the master site plan. It lives forever. So if the city doesn't remove property from the master site plan, it basically can't redevelop under the Central Issaquah plan standards. They can stay under the standards by which they were approved in 1987 in perpetuity if they want to.
Right,
So-
so it's each property owner's decision if they stay with the master site plan or if they choose to go with Central Issaquah.
Right. And so one of the things that Costco is asking for as part of this process is to be allowed to be removed from the master site plan. So
Okay.
I don't know if that helps
it
or makes
does.
it worse,
Yeah,
but
it
that's
does.
what we understand.
Yeah, thank you, and it does clear it up. Now, the question, the second part of the question, why is it coming through the the Development Commission and not PPC or some other commission?
Because it's not a rezone.
Okay, we're asked to
Well,
approve.
Actually, let me set this aside for just a minute. I am going to talk about process in a minute.
Okay.
So let me show you something. When I get there, I'm almost there. And then if you could ask me that question again, if it still doesn't make sense?
Okay, let me just make one point, and
Sure.
I'll probably ask that question again.
Okay.
But, we're asked to give comments or approval to the amendment for about 3 buildings, and the roadways, and the walkway, and the connectivity, and all that. That's a big task, Granted that Mulvaney or Costco, they've done a great job in trying to incorporate the buildings with the surrounding and all that. But, we're asked to make comments for these 3 major buildings. 10-story, you look around, there's no 10-story buildings around here. So that's a big task to turn around and make comments on and make approval. And maybe later on, Shelton can talk about the federal funding. I don't quite understand. September, we're in August already. All of a sudden, September is the deadline. We need to say yay or nay on this issue. So that's the point I just want to make.
Okay,
Yeah.
great, thank you.
Thank you.
So, I'm sorry, before I change, were there any more questions around the master site plan amendment? Okay. So, process. One of the questions that Connie brought up in her letter that you received was around development agreements. The city code identifies several different kinds of development agreements: urban villages, cluster housing, TDRs. There isn't one that specifically fits this circumstance, and we've talked several times with the city attorney, who believes that the state law that enables development agreements can be used to as the basis for this permit. So we have taken that question to the city attorney many months ago as we began this review process. There were also some questions about who was making the decision and what kind of process it was going through. So, there's the development agreement, there's the land plan, which is also part of the development agreement, and the master site plan amendment, which is part of the development agreement. If it was a freestanding land plan, it might be reviewed at a level 3. If it was a freestanding master site plan amendment, it could be reviewed at a level 5. Each of those have different processes and different decision makers, and the public hearing may even be held at a different level. As a consolidated permit, there's one hearing, and the highest level permit is the process that it follows. And the development agreement coming from state law is the highest level permit, and so it follows the process established for that permit. Connie has asked whether we've gotten a reading from the city attorney about consolidating these permits. He had a death in the family, so we haven't been able to contact him since we received that question. And we'll have something for the next meeting in our briefing response memo. So there were many questions in Connie's letter, and some of them we've tried to address tonight, and some of them we will address in the memo. But there was one that we wanted to just touch on as part of our conversation with you this evening, and that was the question about all the properties that surround Lake Sammamish State Park being in the expansion areas, and does that thwart the ability of achieving the vision of Central Issaquah and the connectivity around the park. You know, most of the properties are already developed or we think are likely critical areas. For instance, up here to the north of Siemens and near the Vulcan property, we think those are critical areas. They were developed under King County, so we have less complete records of that area. However, if those properties were developed, redeveloped, we believe that, we know that Central Issaquah requires certain level of connectivity, and that would apply whether those were offices or residential. Would it be nice to have residential around it? Yes. But residential isn't a required use in these zones. It is an optional use, and there it might happen over time. But we don't think that inherently having the expansion areas include the area around the park interferes with the ability of achieving the sort of connectivity and other kinds of relationships that Central Issaquah anticipated. And that's my last slide, so if you want to, I'm assuming you want to ask me questions before Costco staff makes their presentation? No.
I've got one.
Okay.
So, it mentioned that the EIS was based on 1.5 million square feet of additional development in Pickering Place, and this gives Costco the ability to build 1.5 million square feet within Pickering Place. Does that then preclude any other property owners in Pickering Place from getting approval to build anything without redoing the EIS?
So I'm going to also look to Sheldon, because between the two of us, I think we're dangerous enough to probably say a lot of things that aren't exactly true. What I understand is that the planned action EIS for the Central Issaquah plan included what Costco has asked for, but beyond that, and I'm going to give you some numbers, but I'll verify those next time to make sure that you guys don't walk away with a misunderstanding. What I understand tonight is there's another 500,000 square feet of retail and about 5,000 residential units that are expected in Pickering as part of the planned action EIS from the CIP. But Mel, I'll verify those numbers and get that to you guys in the briefing memo so there's not a misunderstanding. But my understanding sitting here tonight is they're taking all the office. They're the first ones in. They're the first ones to ask. So congratulations. Sometimes it's good to be first. There is additional retail and there's additional residential left over for others to come in and take advantage of the planned action EIS. Now, once that's gone, it doesn't mean that others can't redevelop. What it means is they have to do SEPA like everybody else has to do SEPA in other places where the planned action EIS wouldn't apply.
Great, thank you.
Well, and I would add that, you know, for instance, the planned action only applied to the urban core. So for instance, when Seventh and Gilman and Atlas came to you, they had to do a certain level of SEPA review as well, because they were outside the urban core.
Okay. I guess another question, if I understand, the master site plan, as I understood it from years ago, had a wedding cake requirement in it. Did it go up to 4 stories, was it, at a maximum, or 5?
Couple of fives, I'm hearing.
Because I remember years ago when I think they wanted to build a hotel on the parcel, and at that point wanted, if I remember right, they wanted an amendment to the master site plan to allow taller buildings near the freeway outside the wedding cake design, and was not recommended by the commission to do that. So if I understand this correctly, if we don't do the amendment to the master site plan, or if the council doesn't, they wouldn't be able to go taller than they would be limited more than what the CIP allows.
Exactly.
So,
Right.
I mean, just to give you a little bit more about the master site plan, it limited building height, it limited land uses, so residential is not allowed, period, and it also had a certain number of traffic trips. So and square footage. So it's basically at its peak right now. So if we retain the integrity of the master site plan, I think what you can expect is the Pickering property owners as a whole would not be redeveloping.
And one other thing I would add is also, they've used all the impervious surface. So that's part of why there are sidewalks on one side of the streets and things, because it was very restrictive.
Thank you.
There was a brief mention of retail. I just wanted to confirm, is retail an option?
In
Or
the
is it totally-
250,000, so there's 1.5 million square feet, and 250,000 of that, up to 250,000 could be retail.
Okay. But we're just at such the beginning stages that we don't know would it be like on the ground floor with office above?
So one of the
Or-
things that might be worth bringing up here, because we talked about a lot of stuff, is let's assume that they did want to build a big block of retail, another 150,000 square feet or more of retail. That's not shown on the land plan. So that would need to come back to DC, and DC would be the decision maker on that particular application if it were to come in the future. Because right now the land plan shows some minor additions to the retail store, and I think there's something floating out in the parking lot maybe.
Oh,
but
the Costco retail store.
Costco retail store. So, but the amount of square footage, if they wanted to do something of substance, fairly large, and it was more than 150,000 square feet, that's not shown on the land plan right now in front of you guys. So that would have to come back here somewhere in the future.
Okay, I had in mind, in the new office building, some other retail tenants on ground floors. Is that what you guys are talking about? You're talking about
At this
additional
time, that
Costco
is not-
retail space?
Right, at this
Okay.
time, that isn't part of the land plan proposal.
Okay. All right, I thought about that when there was some discussion of bringing the public into those spaces. When we were discussing the plazas and the pond and everything, being accessible to the public and not just to Costco employees and guests. I thought about that format.
Right, I think we would all be supportive of that, but at this time, there isn't a requirement in the Central Issaquah standards to do mixed use. It's certainly encouraged, and we would be supportive of that, but that isn't what is actually proposed at this time.
Okay, thanks.
And if they did decide, say, to do 150,000 of retail, that wouldn't cut into the 500,000 of retail presumed for other parts of Pickering in the EIS?
That's the way I understand that, yes.
Great, thanks.
And just to be clear, although Costco has not expressed an intent for doing that, as Lucy said, the way the development agreement is written, it wouldn't preclude it. So if Costco, let's say 10 years from now, Costco decides, you know what, it'd be great to have some third-party retailers on our ground floor of our office buildings, it would absolutely be allowed.
I'm done. So I'm going to hand it over to my honorable colleague from Mulvaney here. Oh, okay, excuse me. That makes sense.
Thank you, Lucy. Good job. Up, down, or? Da, 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 da. There we go. Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, my name is Jackie Frank. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate Development for Costco. I've been before this body many times, going back 20 years, for the initial warehouse, for Building 2, for Building 3, for the trading building. Nice to be back. I wanted to, let's see. So we've been involved in the process for a while. Back in 2007, representatives of Costco became a member of the city's committee to consider rezoning of the valley floor. Peter Kahn actually was a member of the Economic Vitality Commission, and also a chamber member for government affairs. Between 2012 and 2013, we worked well with staff and provided input to the commission and the council for the development of the development and design standards. And most recently, from 13 to 14, we've worked with staff on applying the Central Issaquah Development Standards to the Costco campus through this development agreement process. But first, before I really get started, I'd like to extend, on behalf of the company, our appreciation for staff. We've been treated with a tremendous amount of respect and professionalism, and we've enjoyed a marvelous collaborative relationship for many, many years. Tonight, we have Kim Katz, who's our development director for Costco, and Steve Bullock of Mulvaney G2, who will give the lion's share of the presentation. Russ Hazard, a principal with Mulvaney, is here. David Markley of TSI, our traffic engineer, and Bob Shilgren from Dowell, our civil engineer, are also here this evening. They don't have a formal presentation, but can be available to answer any questions if you have them. So when we look at the benefits that would accrue to this process that we're undertaking, several things pop out to us. Number one, by implementing the development agreement, it allows us to develop or redevelop the property that we own consistent with the Central Issaquah plan. It also manifests the city's vision for a more urban environment. As I mentioned, we've enjoyed a long-standing partnership, and I think this continues that collaborative relationship. But it also, for us, secures a long-term home for Costco's corporate campus. Issaquah is our home and has been our home for many years, and we hope that it will be our home for many years to come. But by approving this, it creates a context for future specific development applications. So we're basically establishing the ground rules and the framework within which to develop. And it's helpful for us. It provides us certainty to know that these are the kinds of projects and the kind of the rules of engagement for our planned growth. But we also think that it creates a very efficient and a certain level of certainty for a process that would help us execute this 30-year build-out. The process itself encourages a very thoughtful approach that integrates an existing campus and the Central Issaquah plan, and as Sheldon will tell you, it provides funding to construct significant road infrastructure. So tonight, I wanted to take a couple minutes, when I was before you 20 years ago for the warehouse, an entirely different story. So I'd like to kind of bring you up to speed on where we are today as a company. Talk a little bit about why we're here, some development background of the campus itself. Steve will give you a little more definition on future thoughts, and Kim will talk a little bit. Well, Kim will talk a little bit about the benefits that we see of this process. So, it's part of my travels and doing land use work for Costco throughout North America. I spend a lot of time explaining who we are to people who don't know us that well. This is our home. This particular warehouse is a highly successful building. I would imagine, I would hope that many, if not all of you, have Costco cards. If not, you should. But we've enjoyed a tremendous amount of success over the years, and we're very proud. Today, we are in fact the second largest retailer in the United States, and we are the third largest retailer in the world. We're in the Fortune 20, less than Fortune 20. We're number 19 and moving up. At the end of this fiscal year, we will have probably about $110 billion in sales. Throughout the chain of our business, we have developed over 94 million square feet of retail, which is on average about 144,000 square feet. We have about 190,000 employees worldwide, with about 130,000 employees in the United States. In the Pickering campus, there's about 3,000 employees, and then in the area that's kind of adjacent in some of the leased buildings, we have probably a grand total of around 4,100 employees. Today, we've got 663 warehouses. This is as we end our fiscal year in the next 2 weeks or so. This is a snapshot of what it looks like. We have 468 warehouses in the United States, 88 in Canada, 33 in Mexico. We've just opened in Spain just in the last month or so, 26 in the United Kingdom, Taiwan, Korea, and Japan. We have quite a presence, and we have 6 operating warehouses in Australia. So we're doing well. A little bit of a timeline. Costco was founded in Seattle in 1983 and part of my history, and one reason why we're in Issaquah, we were based in Kirkland way back when, and I think we had about 60 warehouses at that time. We were processing entitlements in Redmond. We were going to do a warehouse facility and also a corporate office, and that was going to be it. Overnight, we had secured permits and entitlements for that. Overnight, we merged with the Price Company, basically doubling the size of the company, which caused us to take a step back and say, "Whoa, we're now going in a slightly different direction." The opportunity came up. At the time, we were processing the entitlements for the warehouse here, and the opportunity came up with Children's Orthopedic Hospital to take a look and kind of realize a vision for the company to establish a corporate campus and really grow the business in a different way. In 1994, we opened the warehouse here, and we moved to Issaquah, our new home, in 1995. In 1997, we constructed the trading building. 1998, our second building, Building 2, was built. It's interesting, though, in 2001, we built Building 3, and that's where things pretty much maxed out. And we talk about the master site plan and some of the constraints associated with that contract zoning, if you will. It tied our hands at that level at that point where we could not continue to develop office space on the campus, which forced us to then look at leasing other properties. In 2002, we leased Lake Place 2. 2008, we leased Lake Place 1. And then most recently, we've completed our parking garage. and in 2014, just most recently released some space on the Microsoft campus. The reason why we grow our central headquarters is really a function of the support for, for the warehouse operations. Functions like real estate and legal and the buying, accounting, IS, are all functions that grow as a function of the business growing. And since we intend to continue growing the business, you can expect that we're going to continue to grow the support functions that allow the business to run. Issaquah is definitely on the map. We have extraordinary relationships with vendors, big-time vendors all over the world, and I'm pleased to say there's a lot of people who know where Issaquah is. They may not be able to pronounce it, but they know where it is, and I think there's some very positive spin-off benefits relative to hotel use and restaurant, and we have a lot of vendors who come and visit us on our turf, and we're very proud of Issaquah and the hospitality that you've shown to our vendors community. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Kim, and then subsequently to Steve to take you through some more specifics. And of course, we'll all be available to answer any questions. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Kim Katz. I'm a real estate development director with Costco. And my share of the slides are going to be relatively quick because Lucy did such a fantastic job of explaining why we're here. Did I just set that page down? So one reason we're here was to talk about the MTFA and the benefits of partnering with the city on the funding of that and improving the transportation element. The land plan, of course, we've talked about as being a very critical component of the development agreement and setting kind of a framework of what our future growth might look like. And we've hit on the master site plan, and I think we'll probably continue on this theme tonight because that definitely has limited our growth potential in serving our campus needs. And we're hoping that, we can implement the SIDS and the CIP as part of our future campus expansion. So this Issaquah is our home. It's my home. I live in Issaquah, so I am very motivated to to keep this going, keep the process going. And as Jackie mentioned, as we expand our warehouses, we do need more growth for our home office. We thought this was an interesting aerial because it kind of describes how the campus has grown over the years. As Jackie mentioned, we opened our warehouse in '94, and you can kind of see how we maxed out in Pickering, and we've continued to expand outside of the campus. We have 2 offices over, we call them Lake Place 1 and Lake Place 2. We own one of them and lease one of them, and we've recently signed a lease for one of the Microsoft buildings, which we'll be moving people over to in the next few months. So, our intent of expanding the campus is to accommodate our business growth, but also to consolidate our employees and get the synergy between all of the other components of the home office, which, as Jackie mentioned, accounting, buyers, the IS department. We would like to keep all of our staff kind of in one area because it does create, just more efficient use of the campus. And I think with that, I turn it over to Steve.
Thanks, Kim. Good evening, Commissioners. It's an honor to be here tonight. It's exciting to be part of a project that it feels like we're getting to one of the big milestones again for the things that Costco is doing here in the community, and so I'm glad to be here and to be part of this project and to hopefully try to explain this in a way that makes it logical and have sense and be a rational approach to this. You know, we've been talking about the Pickering Place master plan, and this is actually a rendering from that original master plan. And if you look at it real closely, you'll see a bunch of low-rise structures with surface parking out in front of them, buildings set way back from the roads, lots of trees and landscaping, and it's just a very suburban type development, something that we all expected to see 30 years ago. But as the region has grown and as we are becoming a more urban place, you know, visions are changing, and the master site plan was kind of locked in time. And it was this suburban development approach. It had very large street setbacks. There's surface parking lots. There's lots of lawn and landscaping in front of the buildings. And then because we're in Issaquah, there was a big push to protect and honor environmentally sensitive areas like streams and shorelines. And you know, these are some images that show what happened out there in Pickering Place. And it's not bad, it's just what happened. And now as time has gone on, as we're, you know, getting close to 30 years from when that master plan was approved, there's new visions. Here's a shot of a portion of Costco's campus, and you see how far back the buildings are set back from the road, and the landscaping and the lawn, the surface parking lots in front. Here's an image of the streams that we're preserving and honoring at the same time here. But the MSP definitely has maxed out what it would allow to happen, and that's been said several times already tonight. The amount of trips that were allowed when it was first approved were getting close to maxed out in 2001, and that's why Costco didn't build any more office buildings on site after 2001. We were allowed to, or able to, build the parking garage because the garage in and of itself doesn't generate the trips. It's just providing a parking place for the office users to use, but it doesn't generate the trips. That was the one reason why that one major structure has been able to be built on the Costco corporate campus since 2001. But then there's other things associated with the master site plan, the height limits, and just as mentioned before, it was kind of a wedding cake effect with 5-story buildings kind of in the center of the facility of Pickering Place, and then kind of sloping out to 2-story buildings around the perimeter. I think there was a total of 2 lots that had the ability to go up to 5 stories. And so then over the last few years, as we've been considering the new Central Issaquah plan and the new development and design standards, there's been a lot of talk between Mulvaney and Costco about what the potential will be to maybe start building on Costco's campus again, and we see it as a great opportunity. You know, there still is some similarities between the master site plan and the current codes. You know, there still is this idea to honor and protect the environmentally sensitive areas and views of the area. There's a very strong push to recognize and continue to grow the community spaces and the circulation connections. But then some of the differences is obviously the density differences, low to high, and the suburban model to a more urban model. Something that's not so car-centric but more multimodal, and allowing for pedestrians, bicyclists, mass transit, and the rest. You know, one of the elements of the Central Issaquah plan is the circulation plan. And as mentioned before, you know, the development agreement is going to link future development on Costco's corporate campus with implementing some of these plans from the Central Issaquah plan, putting new roads in that don't even exist, improving ones that don't have enough capacity. So the current campus I'm going to use my mouse here a little bit. You know, it's got some interesting attributes that make it a unique place. And, you know, for one thing, on the east side of the campus, you all are familiar with Issaquah Creek, and you can kind of see that it creates an undulating line there. There's no roads that cross that, and there's only going to be one. On the east side of the west side of Costco's campus, there's the pond, and again, it's a very irregular shape, very organic, and the roads that go through Pickering Place are also kind of following those contours, and they're very organic and kind of natural in their shape. And those things have made for irregular property boundaries, and they're going to make it difficult, or it makes it a challenge, to integrate infill development along with this existing campus. This campus that was designed specifically for Costco, the buildings that they put there because they built them just for themselves. And they value them, and they love being here, and they want to continue to build there and make it a custom campus for them. The areas that we see on the campus that are potentially available for expansion, down on the south end of the campus, there's 2 large surface lots just north of I-90. And then there's also the trading building, which is probably, it is the smallest building from a square footage perspective, and it's 2 stories only for half of the building, and the other half of the building is just 1 story. So there's an opportunity there maybe to redevelop that for additional office space. And then there's this surface lot here kind of on the northeast corner of buildings 1 and 2. And those areas provide a lot of opportunity for Costco to continue to grow and add office space. There's potentially 2 buildings there on the southeast corner of the site, another building on the south of building 3, and then the one up there to the northeast of buildings 1 and 2. And we have, as a Costco and Mulvaney, we have poured through the Central Issaquah Development and Design Standards page by page. I won't say that I have them memorized. There's too much there, but we have studied them and tried our best to understand them. And one of the things that we feel very confident about is that there is enough area here in these footprints under the height limits that were allowed in the urban core zone to easily accommodate the 1.5 million square feet that we've asked for. And in all likelihood, we won't have anything 10 stories. We want to leave our options open, but we don't need to have them go up to 10 stories to get to the 1.5 million. Lucy did a great job of kind of going through in more detail than I am about how the project at this conceptual level, and it is still very conceptual, we have every intent to come in with individual projects that are fully detailed out and show you exactly how we continue to meet the design and development standards. But right now we're just at a really conceptual stage, and we believe that we can put together projects that will comply. And one of the things that we want, some of the major areas of focus that we think are of interest to you and to us at this point and at this level of review are the areas of the CIP and of the design and development standards that cover community spaces, site design, and building design. We like to focus you a little bit on some of the community spaces that are already in Pickering Place, both on Costco's property, some of them on commonly owned property that Costco has constructed. And, you know, they're all places that have been done with a great deal of care, that are done to a high quality and a high standard, and they provide great value for both Costco's corporate population and anybody else that is walking through the area and enjoying it. The landscaping is full and thick, mature and beautiful. The gathering spaces offer lots of pedestrian amenities. There are great connection places and plazas sprinkled through Pickering Place. the current campus, the buildings that are out there have very noticeable and obvious intuitive ways to access the front doors for pedestrians, walkways, and such. And granted, they are of a more suburban variety, a lower intensity. And that's going to change and evolve as we move into what is required under the Central Issaquah Plan. There's even the community amphitheater, which is almost a work of art, and although it was placed on commonly held property, it was actually built by Costco for the enjoyment of the people that are in Pickering Place and those that come through the area. There's multimodal pathways already sprinkled throughout the property. So when we look at where we would potentially do our new development, we see opportunities to develop more community spaces similar to those and of even a higher quality and definitely of a quality that is more urban in character than what's there now. Something that would relate to the sidewalk and be intuitive about how people enter the building, how they get where they need to go, what's going on. And those spaces would be integrated with the landscape and with the architecture and with the different things that get included with that. You know, one of the things that we keep talking about internally as we're discussing this is just how it's a great challenge to try to integrate this new campus plan and this new code and vision into an existing campus that we're going to be keeping and that works well for us. But how do we integrate this new design aesthetic into an existing aesthetic and make them still work together and make them not clash and have them be compatible with each other? As Lucy mentioned, there's a section that talks about site design, and here we have an example of an entry plaza where there's a great there's very clear cues about what a pedestrian is supposed to do as they walk up here. There's raised planting beds, there's landscaping that are not places where you're supposed to go, there's obvious walkways where you are to go. There's an integration of both the circulation pattern and gathering space, all sprinkled through that area, and we see that as a very desirable and attractive space. You know, here we have an example of raised beds and landscaping in association with what looks like a public road, and those all are creating spaces, and one of the things that the design and development standards encourage is something that creates strong edges and creates and defines where that public way is, and then where the community spaces are adjacent to that public way, and where the gathering spaces are and entrances are in relation to that. We see this as an interesting image about how to apply landscaping and transition to hardscape and all those things I think are going to be things that we have to deal with as we're trying to integrate these two visions of an existing campus that was developed under a different vision and now we're implementing a new vision. We like this image for a number of different reasons. You know, it's got these architectural elements, these trellises and columns that help frame a space and create an outdoor room. We've got the motion and the interest of the water and you know, the change in elevation, the different kinds of landscape features from raised beds to potted plants to boulders projecting up out of the ground. There's a lot of interesting things there, and we see these all as being potential ideas and things that we could implement in the future as we go about creating those kinds of spaces as well. For building design, you know, the design and development standards are talking about context and compatibility. There's things related to scale and urban densities and height, materials and colors, quality of the architecture and detailing, obviously sustainability, and then there's the overlap between pedestrian engagement and sharing community spaces. And we've got some images here where we're just wanting to say that we're not trying to build any of these exactly as you're going to see them. It's more to give you an idea of what we think are interesting and ways that we might go in the future. And when we get to putting together a project, we're going to put together a full package and show you what it's going to look like and bring it in and say, okay, this is what we're doing now, and this is going to be fully detailed. But this point here is just kind of conceptual brainstorming. You know, we're kind of looking for you guys to dream along with us about what might happen out there. This image is actually Building 3 out on the campus now, and it's a very beautiful building, and architecturally it's got a lot of interesting features. They've done a great job of pulling cues from the original buildings on campus, the brickwork and some of the roof forms, and they implemented them in a new and fresh way on Building 3. They introduced some new materials and some new architectural forms that I think are very, very pleasing. And as Building 3 kind of built off of Building 1 and 2, I think that when Costco and if Mulvaney is part of it, Mulvaney, when we go to build Buildings 4, 5, and 6, we would like to kind of take that same approach where we try to pull cues from the existing campus, but then also grow it and make it nicer and even better than the old stuff is. You know, here's an image of a building that is showing something of a higher density. You know, potentially we could get up to 10 stories in Pickering Place. I don't know that we will get there, but you know, we need to think about scale and architectural quality. We like this image because of what it says about detailing, the architectural detailing, the care that somebody went to give it some extra materials and texture and a finer grain and you know, lots of different things going on here that make the building an interesting building. There's also things here related to sustainability, passive shading and things like that are good for energy sustainability things. And we want to be innovative as we continue to build out there on the campus. Here's one more image of Building 3, the backside of it, where it's got a large plaza that's used quite a bit by the employees. And there's a lot of great things here. There's some really interesting detailing approaches, some different and unique architectural approaches that make it a very pleasing building. There's the community spaces and the pedestrian engagement that we find all very, very compelling. So in summary, as it relates to the development and design standards and our land plan, we feel like the land plan is a framework and a context for future development applications. We also believe, and not believe, this is just the way the development agreement and your code is set up, is future applications are going to come and they're going to be reviewed for compliance with the land plan, with the development and design standards, and also with the development agreement. And Costco is committed to creating interesting urban infill development that embodies the policies of the CIP and the design standards. So to close, we just kind of want to hit on the benefits that Mr. Frank brought up at the start of this presentation. Implementing the development agreement that we're proposing between Costco and the city allows Costco to develop consistent with the Central Issaquah Plan, which we believe then manifests the city's vision for a more urban environment. It continues a long-standing partnership between Costco and the city, and it secures a long-term home for Costco and their corporate campus. We believe the land plan also provides a context for future specific development applications, which we believe is important. It helps us to not have to go back and restart every single project. We all kind of start with the same understanding and we can build off of that as opposed to going back to square one each time. And it creates an efficient and certain process for a 30-year build out. you know, implementing this new vision on an existing campus is a great challenge, and we believe that the development agreement encourages a real thoughtful approach, both for us as applicants and for city staff, that integrates the existing campus with the CIP, and finally, that it provides funding to construct very significant and valuable road infrastructure. So with that, unless you have any questions for me, I'll sit down.
Architect-specific question, maybe you can answer.
Architect-specific question?
Just, the map that shows the proposed buildings,
Yes,
there's a dashed line
on building
between
6.
buildings 4A and
Oh.
4B
Yes,
that goes through the western portion of 4A. Is that have to do with a view corridor or anything, or?
are you talking about this dashed line that goes right here?
Correct.
And it actually, if you follow it, it actually goes around the entire perimeter of the building. And what that was meant to indicate is roughly the perimeter of underground parking garage.
Great. Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Did you say underground parking or under the building? You meant under the building?
Under building, underground.
Oh, there's underground building.
Just one level, probably maybe 2. It's a tough area to do that because there's
Yeah.
pretty high groundwater.
So how many levels are you thinking about now? 2 levels
Of parking?
One underground, one ground level?
No, so the ground level is going to be flush with the sidewalk. There's not going to be any exposed parking to the sidewalk. There's going to be plaza spaces, maybe on the back side of buildings, depending what the grades are. Maybe there might be some places where the garage might be exposed, but it would be underground.
Mhm. Thank you.
So Commission Member Leong asked the question earlier about timing for Sheldon, and I didn't want to lose track of that piece because it was, I think, an important question about timing for the transportation
Federal
component
funding.
of this.
On the federal
You
funding.
said federal funding, I'm not saying federal funding.
Oh.
So I'll do a quick overview, Sheldon, and if you want to add some, feel free to come up and do that. So a big piece of this development agreement revolves around paying for the $50 million of road projects that are going to benefit not only Costco, but the rest of Pickering and North Issaquah. Because you can't build half a road. So you build a whole road and there's extra capacity that's going to be available beyond what Costco needs to realize their 1.5 million square feet. So the way that the MTFA, the Master Transportation Financing Agreement, is laid out is it's a partnership. They pay for a certain portion, we pay for a certain portion. What we're relying on, or what we're hoping for, is that we can accomplish much of the city's obligation through state, not federal, through state grants. And so what Sheldon mentioned earlier was making an application to the Transportation Improvement Board.
Mm-hmm.
And the Transportation Improvement Board is a state agency that allocates money out to the state based on worthiness of projects. And some of the criteria that they have is they want to make sure that if we apply for a traffic project, that it's a real project and not just something that we hope to get money for that we might someday build, because there's a long line of municipalities and agencies looking for these limited funds. And so one of the things that helps our application immensely is to have a development agreement done, because a development agreement is like a contract. It's with us and a very big company in our state, not Boeing, but a very big company in our state, that's important, that we want to keep and help grow in our community. And so having that development agreement done adds points, if you will, to the rating system of the application that we're going to submit for getting state monies to help build the road. So hopefully that makes sense. And Sheldon, if you want to add some, this is your enchilada, so to speak. So feel free to, pull that apart if you want to.
No, that was a really good summary, Keith. I just want to add a little bit more to it. One of the specific criteria for this application is growth and development. And that's the criteria and one of the major criteria for the whole scoring of the application in front of the Transportation Improvement Board. But to be able to demonstrate that, as Keith said, the development agreement needs to be executed. And the TIB begins their evaluations of applications October 1st. And so we need to have definitely in hand the development agreement to give to the TIB so that they know that is a funded and buildable project with a partner, because that's the other substantial criteria that's under the growth and development, is that there has to be a substantial partnership with private development or local money to be able to, for them to say, yes, that's a valid application and they're willing to fund it.
Thank you.
So hopefully that helps.
Yeah, it does. It helps half of it. The other half, the question that I have is Issaquah the partner? Is Issaquah prepared, or does Issaquah have the money to come up
Yes.
to match that state
Yes,
funding?
between Costco and the money that Issaquah has and the grant money, those projects, all the projects within the suite of improvements that the partnership is about will be funded.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So obviously that's, that's a big thing for us. It's a big number, but this is important. And if the development agreement is approved, and depending on how successful Sheldon is in getting grant monies, we already have $5 million that we got from the Department of Commerce grant to purchase some open space as mitigation for the road system. So we've already kind of been in line once, and we're wanting to get in line again and ask for some additional monies. The hope is that whatever's left, there probably will be some left over at the end of the day that the city has to figure out how to fund. But when you're talking about funding a $50 million road project, and the city's share might be, hopefully, knock on wood, less than $5 million worth of that, that's a great investment for our community to make in additional infrastructure that will help our community grow.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah. But at the same time, though, we'd like to make sure that the interests of Issaquah is taken care of. So there's some concern, and I guess off the top is that we have numbers for 1.5 million square feet of office space that Costco can do whatever that's the option that's open to Costco. I guess it would be nice to have something that says so many % of that or square feet would be dedicated to plaza or parks or something like that. I see area that says pedestrian entryway, which could potentially be a courtyard. I guess that's what you're thinking about, Steve. So, maybe if we can come up with some kind of number, so it ties everybody together, and so we have some ideas of how much is dedicated to office space, how much of that is for retail, and how much is that for open space and plaza and parks. Thank you.
Presentation's completed, so now we can go to members of the community. We'll ask you if there's members of the community that want to ask questions or make comments. Yeah, if you'll step to the microphone and state your name and address. And again, it's late in the evening, so try to keep your comments to 5 minutes, please.
Good evening. I'm Jim Severs, and I'm the owner of Pickering Square. And I just have a brief comment that I'll read here that's being given to you for our, in compliance with our deadline of Friday. I'm the owner of Pickering Square Retail Shopping Center, northeast corner of Pickering Place, directly west of Costco store. Our 13 retail tenants comprise over half the retail stores at Pickering Place, including Costco warehouse store. I also represent the other owners of Pickering Place as a permanent board member of Pickering Place Owners Association, PPOA, organized to implement the CCNRs and the Issaquah Master Plan. Now, as an overview, first let me state that as owner, I support the Central Issaquah vision incorporated in the CIP and the CIDDS. I believe other owners share my desire to move from the 1987 Suburban Pickering Place Master Plan to allow future development under this vision. In fact, I have been negotiating with Costco attorneys on proposed amendments to our CCNRs that will remove the master permit from the CCNR and allow Issaquah to adopt zoning and development standards processes to guide the redevelopment which is consistent with a true urban center. Our proposed draft included full range of CIP issues, including residential, which is currently prohibited in Pickering Place. We understand from a meeting with your mayor and city officials yesterday that some urgency has come up with the two applications to Costco to remove the Costco properties from the master plan for a development agreement to allow higher density of the CIP in consideration for substantial funding toward the planned action transportation model to support this density. However, CCR amendments are still needed in addition to removing Costco parcels from the city's master plan, since these are private covenances recorded for mutual protection and benefit of all parcels at Pickering Place. For example, the height of proposed Costco towers and additional garage floors in the land plan are in violation of the CCNRs, regardless of the council's adaptation of major amendments removing Costco parcels from the master plan, which consists of the same height restrictions. We believe assurances from senior Costco officials stated yesterday that they are ready to immediately complete these negotiations for CCNR amendments. It is our hope that these can be approved in a time frame which will keep the transportation funding schedule intact, and it won't be for lack on our part. On a related note, the staff report states that there are no criterion for major amendment to the master plan. Apparently, the city believes it can remove a property upon the request of one owner when the master plan was a contract with the owner of all the property. Now, many successors and their successors of that owner. We acknowledge that the DA has a vague condition to protect interest of those left behind, and we'll be watching for more detailed substance and process that needs to be added to this part of the DA. For example, the PPOA, Pickering Place Owners Association, common roads and common areas are going to be impacted. However, if we are successful in amending the CCNRs to include a process for owner association approval for removing all Pickering Place from the master plan, this part of the development agreement will be moot. If not, we reserve our right to challenge the amendment process of the master plan requested in the Costco application. The staff report was complete and clear. But we have a few questions, and I would like the staff to either address it tonight or we'll take written comment to not take up too much time tonight. One, the background section talks about the new 1.5 million feet included in the Costco retail store. It goes on to state the staff will attempt to make a compliant with the CIDDS as soon as possible regarding the remodel and full compliance. That's been already discussed, and you can read more of our comments on that. One of you brought it up. And the question on number 8 was about the EIS. That was also brought up. On the maps, we do not see the recently annexed area to PPOA, Pickering Place Owners Association by Costco. What is the location in the area? Does the city plan to assume ownership of this parcel in the future, including responsibility for maintenance of the wetland critical area? How much is current and proposed expansion of Costco retail store? How many parking spaces will be displaced by Costco retail store car wash? All parking must be contained on-site for Costco retail store and office buildings. Why is the discussion and location of future Costco expansion area not owned by Costco included in the DA? Many of the exhibits to the staff report are inaccurate as to drainage and wetland in critical areas. As part of the master plan amendment, the remaining 3 wetland critical areas shown in the master plan permit should be subject to replacement without regard to being in the city of Issaquah. In conclusion, Pickering Place does not support the current Costco application until these issues are addressed. We've been working on this for years, and Costco has not been the good neighbor. They've violated our parking, and parking is critical to any retail tenant.
We're 5 minutes are up.
Then I'm done.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you. David Kapler, 255 Southeast Andrews Street. The pace that we're charging in on this is of great concern, and how the public involvement and the commission involvement and the rest is of a serious concern, how that can be managed. And I hope the public involvement and the commission involvement is not shortened out in that process. Some picky things and some sidewalk on 11th. Just west of the Costco store, there's no sidewalk on the east side of 11th. Drives me nuts. But, I mean, there's no sidewalk west of, which is not in their, part of their plan, and no sidewalk west of Red Robin. I mean, there's things to figure out on the some of those kinds of things. A little picky, but it would sure, this is the time maybe we can address them, get it done. Sounds like bikes are allowed on the trail around the pond. Do you really want to have bikes on that trail with thousands of people working right there and on a narrow trail? It's often icy or wet or slimy. But we got curved streets and we want all these crosswalks and stuff. So the street design and how we get these crosswalks between the different buildings really needs to be done well. So, because we're going to have a lot of traffic through there with the parking garage, the new roads, and the rest. Really need to be concentrating on people being aware of all those pedestrians out there. Open space. Lately, my confidence in the cities dealing with open space is real low, and very frustrating. I'm concerned about the open space along the creek, Issaquah Creek, and some of the other open space areas, and how that will be dealt with. The trail over there is most probably, when you start mixing the bikes and the pedestrians, it's too narrow along the creek. Really should be widened, and maybe consider separating the bikes and the pedestrians when you're going to add this many additional people. You know, you've been over there, you've seen all the people walking around with badges from Costco. The employees get out and use the trail system. With that many more people on that trail, is that trail really adequate? At the same time, I'm always fighting for trees, but at the same time along that trail, we got some big cottonwoods that are really not trees that should be overhanging a highly used pedestrian and bicycle trail. And management of those resources needs to be more proactive over time to make that safer, but also be an appropriate habitat along the creek. 12th Avenue overcrossing, they're talking about a full, it's shown on the map here tonight. I'm real skeptical about the cost and whether we want that. To me, we need to be looking at flyer stations, bus flyer type drop-offs along I-90 and a pedestrian bicycle crossover of I-90. And that hopefully will not be precluded by what's going to be happening at the site over time. The development agreements may be allowed by the state to cover this. Whether the city code actually allows the type of development being proposed here is another question. And that's the limiting factor on the development agreement. We need to make sure we're in compliance with city code, not just state law, but both. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Anybody else? Connie?
Hi, I'm Connie Marsh. You know where I live already, or at least where I work. So I was just reading the code again about development agreements, and all of the other development agreements are actually required to be sent by Development Commission to the council, recommended. So where it said optional up here, that's not what I found in the code. They said it's a requirement. So when they staff focuses you on the land plan, from everything I can see, you're actually sending the whole development agreement, and the land plan is a part of that. And I guess I'm disturbed by what seems to me to be a refocus away from one of your main tasks, which is looking at the development agreement and making comments on that. So I think they can't stop you, but that's not where they're hurting you. He covered the Pickering, so I'm going to let that go. Plan to action ordinance, if you read the actual language within the plan to action ordinance, it says that in order to qualify for the plan to action ordinance, you have to fulfill the requirements of the CIP. Because they're doing a development agreement, clearly they don't, so I don't see how you can use the plan to action ordinance for your environmental review for this, and perhaps another legal opinion would be good. The description of the interface with the state park wasn't convincing at all. This thing in the land plan also has to interface with the state park along with the other areas to give us the connectivity that we need for the central Issaquah plan. So I think that needs to be strengthened. Okay, so I'm assuming you guys read my lengthy and ridiculously detailed email, and I apologize for that, but it made me crazy, so I had to do it. So now I want to talk about some things that I think are way more fun. And Costco, you're probably going to dislike this as much as you dislike the Land and Shore Committee meeting, but I look at the images that are presented, and I say this is for old people, and I am one of those old people. I see lots of staid, sort of static, yeah, we have a rock, and I guess that's not what I want anymore. I want places that are active and entertaining and potentially even bright. So when you're looking at a plaza, I don't see rockery. I went around Issaquah last year and I said, what do you guys want in your parks? And I talked to adults, and I went to many people. And you know what they said? They said, we want adult swings. We want bouncy toys. We want places where we can balance and goof around and just, some places of peace, but a lot of places where we can just sort of de-stress, and we want them close. And we want to have fun. And I'm going, well, yeah, I want to walk, I want to go to the mountains. But if you're going out to a plaza, what do you really want to be doing? And so I'm thinking, I want an immense Scrabble board where you can change out the tiles and make words. And it's Costco, it's a private campus. I don't even care if you spell check it, and they could even be obscene. I would encourage that. Maybe not everyone. I want words like joy, laughter, relaxation, and conversation to be your words, not sustainable. Yeah, that's good, but that's a given. You have to do it. How do you create a vibrant, excellent area where when people go to their plaza, they feel these things? So I think the vocabulary needs to change in how you're looking at it all. And that will help provide some of the interface that you get with the city, because if you make it that awesome for your people, then you're going to get us coming over to play on your adult swings and play your big Scrabble game, and then we will get a little bit more of the energy that we are seeking in the Central Issaquah plan. And I gotta say, just pretty much all of that is missing. So one of my favorite things is I want a sound pole where you go up and you hit it and it plays random music and then you dance madcap, okay? So why not have fun when you're doing this instead of just being at flip and work all the time? So beyond that, and boring again, when I was looking at all of the paths, very few paths actually went to the trails. They just sort of cut off and went to nowhere and ended. And I didn't see your requirements for the paths actually being able to be linked and looped and connected so you could always get to a trail or a place on all of the paths. And I think that's important when, especially when you're looking at basically making big, huge blockades for, building barriers so people can't walk easily. Okay, so,
5 minutes, Connie.
yep. I don't like this yet. I'm trying to force you to do something better, so please.
Thank you. Anybody else? Okay, again, next, 2 weeks, we'll have another meeting, and you can review the changes to the land use. I'll ask members of the commission if they have any questions or comments that they want to ask.
I guess I'm wondering the process we'll go through on this, since this is still a relatively new experience, I think, as we're dealing with the development agreement and the land plan. So do we want to just provide questions? We've had opportunities for questions, but do we want to do the typical provide observations, comments?
That would be next time. I would think this time would be asking questions. Next meeting, we got another meeting for more questions.
I would prefer to have as much as you can tell us, because what we're going to do is take what we've heard from the public, what we've heard from you. We're going to take that back. We're going to try and respond to that. And what we would prefer, if we need to be redrafting language, changing conditions, providing additional information, we want to do that in a thoughtful way ahead of time so you have a chance to consider it. So we'd prefer to get it tonight.
Okay. So if you've got comments or opinions on anything that we've talked about tonight, go ahead.
I'll jump in.
And-
So.
Well, you may start.
I guess one comment I would have that I would want to see somewhere in there is specifying that it does leave open the 5,000 units and 500,000 square feet of retail within Pickering Place still as capability. Because one of the huge benefits I see here is 1.5 million square feet is probably 6,000 employees, and it'd be a great place to build some housing right next to that within Pickering Place and some more retail. So I'd want that confirmed in there. And the note about the corner of Building 4A, I think it was, bring that out. I understand the agreement. I was on the task force for the development standards, so I understand the bringing it out and creating the urban environment. But that one corner, I thought, would be a perfect place to create some better public open space. It's going to be a real focal point for people driving through there, and to bring the building all the way out, I thought eliminated the possibility of doing something fun at that corner perhaps. And I even wondered about, could that building, I wonder about the possibility of maintaining any views to the southeast down Lake Drive, that Building 4A extends out enough to block any possibility of that. And there was nothing in there really about view corridors and potential vistas to the south. And
It was in the staff report, but you're right, I didn't include it in the presentation.
yeah,
So,
I saw some brief mentions,
Yeah,
but not
you're
about
right.
that specifically. Was it
No.
blocking anything? And
Mhm.
I thought, is there any possibility to bring that building back and maintain more of a view corridor?
Okay.
Thank you.
So, make sure I'm turned on here. So just maybe a few comments. I think I asked my questions. One of them is kind of the procedural comment where under the development agreement, when we're talking about how the Development Commission would be involved in buildings over 150,000 square feet, it was essentially community conference, provide some input. It's kind of a take it or leave it sort of a scenario. Where other projects in the central Issaquah plan at over 150,000 square feet would be subject to a review, and we look at architectural features and implementation of those standards as another level of a detailed review. And I'm wondering why that process wouldn't be applicable here. I understand there's some additional risk, but you're still designing to a standard, and we're not dealing with, changing the site configuration or anything like that. We're talking about building architectural features in compliance with those design standards. And the reason I say that is we are new in the Central Issaquah plan and those design standards, and now we're making an agreement that's going to last for 30 years, it's going to vest to a very new standard. And I think that comment was made in public comments or that were provided by Ms. Marsh. And I think that was a good point. And so I guess I'm trying to find, how do we make sure we're holding the future development of the Costco campus to the rigor of the design standards and making sure we get high quality design? Clearly the work that's been done on campus and the examples you show are high standard, and that's the commitment of the company. But it is, I just want to protect that rigor, I think, into the future, particularly since there's so much newness to the standard. There's
Could I add just one point, clarify one point that you made, and the rest of it we'll address in the memo? The level of information that would come to the Development Commission for buildings over 150,000 square feet, whether you're giving input or whether you're making a decision, the level of information would be the same.
as conceptual as what we're seeing today.
No, at more like the 7th and Gilman project.
Right.
So it would be the same level of information. You would see the building designs, the plaza designs, the landscape plans.
Right.
The question, the proposal in front of you is, since you've seen kind of the general framework of the land plan and made a recommendation on that, for those buildings only, you would be giving input as opposed to making a decision. That's the proposal, but not a reduction in the level of information you would receive at that meeting.
Okay, I understood that.
Okay.
And I just, we're at a conceptual level here, we're approving something at a conceptual level, and our future influence is different than it would be for other similar projects, I guess was my point. So I maybe some additional thought around that.
Okay.
You heard me earlier make comments about the pedestrian bridges, and I continue to have concern, particularly those that cross the public street. And Commissioner Morgan's point about a view corridor, well, you create a view corridor, then you just run pedestrian bridges in front of it, and you've lost your view corridor. So I just wonder what the space will feel like when you're traveling down Lake Lane, when you've got at least two pedestrian bridges crossing in front of you. And the examples that were provided in the commission materials this evening, the agenda materials, showed glass boxes crossing the street. And that's not a very interesting architectural feature in my opinion. So again, I particularly those that cross the street, I'm concerned about that, and also the pulling the pedestrian activity up off of the street. I am concerned about, and with the comment that Commissioner Morgan just made about the total consumption of essentially the office development in the Pickering Place planned action EIS, essentially creating now a barrier to any future office development that might happen, because they will need to go through the more detailed SEPA and potentially environmental review process. So it becomes a barrier to future development. So this development agreement essentially ties that up for 30 years. So something to think about, is there some way to mitigate that or update the planned action EIS at some point down the road, or help to fund that update that addresses the opportunity to create additional office development, although at the same time we want to encourage residential and other sorts of development more so than the office that's being consumed by the Costco proposal. And then the other, and this is a more detailed observation, and we have the trail that runs essentially on the backside of the property. That's what it feels like along Issaquah Creek. And we had quite a conversation about this when the parking garage proposal came through, about essentially the property turning its back to the trail. And so the trail is a great opportunity, I think, to invite people off the trail into the property, into the plazas, to the public spaces, onto the street, even as a connection, an alternative connection to get to the state park through, something that essentially says, come take a look. Because right now, the way this is proposed is the property is turning its back to the trail, and trail users are not going to feel welcome to leave the trail. So I think that's something to think about, and how this, and that's maybe a detail that's got to be dealt with later. But again, that's an amenity that we should be taking advantage of and not turning our backs to the public trail on the backside of the property, so along Issaquah Creek. Those are my comments and observations.
Ray?
Thank you. I guess I just kind of like to dovetail into what Commissioner Brennan had mentioned. You know, the residential part, we didn't talk a lot about the residential, although we did say that at this time it's not being looked at, or the traffic study hasn't been doing that. And a couple of things on that is that, one, there's nothing, right now, the way it's presented, there's nothing that draws the pedestrian into that area. It's all office space, you know, weekends, maybe evenings, there's not a lot of activities going on. So we kind of need something to draw the pedestrian, residential folks into that area. And maybe the residential concept would come in where you have residential folks living there, and so consequently you have the people here. And so that ties in with the plaza concept. You have the plaza, people come out, they spend their time out there, you have trails, and complete the trails so you can have folks using that. So I don't think residential is a bad idea, if that's what you're thinking, and maybe it's in the future, but you know, that's good. You have residential, you have, and by the time residential is completed, you have space set up for open space, plaza, walkway, trails, width of sidewalk is there. I find it very disturbing when you're squeezing the sidewalk or walkway into 4 feet. I mean, you know, 4 feet is basically 2-person walking, and they're always hitting each other. Now, if you're inviting folks to come out from the trail and then biking and walking, you need a wider width of walkway. So I kind of like to see something like that, you know, that you have the space and you have this walkway in there, the plaza and the open space. I'd like what you have right now, taking advantage of the water on the west side there. But if you could invite, you know, have some good invitation for folks to come out, spend some time there, maybe set the building back. So that's what I'm seeing. And I go back to the fact that I mentioned earlier, is that if we could have some numbers, percentage of square feet of open space dedicated to plaza or open space dedicated for garden and stuff like that, I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Richard?
Well, I guess I'm still a little confused on the connection between the master site plan and the central Issaquah plan, and how the, you know, I understand how the value to the Costco property that would be to adopt that. It seems like Pickering Place is kind of put on, there's an onus on them that they, and I don't understand how you reconcile that, I guess. That needs to be cleared up in my mind. Maybe it is to everybody else, and I'm just the slower person on the board.
Could you explain what you said? You said the onus is on the
Pickering Place on the
other property owner?
on the other property.
Okay.
Right. And I don't know how you reconcile that. I think I understand the difference, but I don't understand how they reconcile. You know, it seems like they're being penalized if they're not included in that, in what's going to be granted to Costco. The other thing that concerns me is the tip process in the state highway funding. Having a little bit of familiarity with that, you know, it's great that there's an opportunity for the city to be able to minimize their investment, but there's the downside of that of what if they don't get the project. And I know that's always a bit of a gamble, but it's a pretty, if the number you said was $50 million and the city's obligation would be $5 million, where does the other $45 million come up if it doesn't happen? You know, if they don't get the tip funding, that doesn't make sense to me.
Just, if I can, Mr. Chair, just to clarify the piece. So, just to be clear, right now the way the MTFA reads is there's a partnership. So the city's percentage is 52% of that $50 million project. So so in no case are we paying $50 million for that.
I get that.
So Costco right now is paying $23.7 million guaranteed. And then the city's portion of that could be as high as somewhere around $26 million. We're working to try and reduce that. The goal would be zero. But where that falls along the spectrum, we have to be ready to pay the upper end of that, assuming we get no grant money. So that's what we're walking into this understanding. But still, even with that, even if we got no grant money, we're basically building a project at 50 cents on the dollar. And in any public process, that's not a bad deal. So that's the starting point. And that's assuming zero grant money from the city.
Okay.
Katie?
No, I think all my questions and comments have already been brought up by the
Okay. I guess I want to know from staff, how are you going to address, Connie asked some very intelligent questions, smarter than I could, and kind of would like to know where are we in response to her questions? Are you going to prepare a response memo?
Yes, the questions that are in Connie's letter and in Mr. Seaver's letter will be addressed in our memo.
Okay.
So, and just to add one thing, so Mr. Sievers, Connie, and we actually got another letter. The city received a letter from the Fred Meyer Home Depot Shopping Center. So we'll include that as well, and that represents all the public comments we've gotten on this to date.
Okay.
And I think they were not in town to come to this meeting, but I would be surprised if they didn't come to your next meeting.
So, and we will provide the commission with copies of both of those letters as part of the packet.
I have similar concerns of this transportation. For one thing, it bothers me whenever we talk about getting this much money and we got to hurry because we got a deadline. To me, it's something like we dealt with in a planning policy in regards to going to be an urban center or something. Planning policy said, we don't want to do this because we're only doing it so that we can get money. And that was our recommendation to council, and they said, no, we're going to go ahead. That's why the council makes decisions and we just make recommendations. But anytime we start saying, we got a deadline and we got to get this thing done, is when mistakes happen. And one of the questions that Connie asked is, what about the fact that some of these standards were done on we got to get them done and we can always change them, and now we're going to base something for 30 years. And we don't know if theirs are going to be around in 2 years. They might change everything in 2 years because they aren't working. And how is that going to affect this proposed development agreement? That just bothers me. I'd like to know, the city got a check somewhere in escrow for $26 million?
So just to clarify, I guess what I would task the commission is to think about what their purview is. And in terms of, the MTFA is really a funding agreement between the city and a private developer. And, if you guys feel like that, you don't want to comment on that because you don't think that's in your purview, then I would suggest that you guys be clear that you guys are, whatever is coming out of this commission, you say, hey, we took a pass on that. Because that's the council's bailiwick, and we're going to let them decide whether they want to write that check for $25 million. So I'm just saying, you guys can pick whatever you want to say about that. We will transmit that to the council, but you don't need to take on anything that you feel is beyond your scope.
Okay, except that we're being asked to recommend a development agreement that's sort of contingent on having $25 million. And so if we don't have $25 million, then I'm not sure why we're doing the development agreement. If Did I make myself, is that?
Absolutely.
Am I convoluted, or did you understand what I'm saying, Rick? Okay,
Yeah.
so we might be beating a dead horse.
If I may.
Sheldon's
If I
back.
may. The city's share of this $50 million number is for a suite of improvements, as I mentioned earlier, that is part of the Central Issaquah plan. They are roads that were planned to support the densities of which the city adopted. To date, before the application that we make to the TAB currently, the city has already received $12 million in grants against its share. We're looking for just under 10 with the TAB. We've had meetings with the TAB executive director and their engineering staff that do project grant application reviews. They're very positive about this application. I can't guarantee it, but we've been talking with them for 3 years, and they've just about been begging us to bring the application in. So if that application gets in and is awarded, the city is looking probably on the order of $3 million out of its pocket for $50 million of improvements. So that's kind of the status of where we are. I just wanted to
Okay,
address
I
your question a
appreciate
little
that.
bit more thoroughly.
Woulda,
So,
coulda, shoulda.
yeah.
Woulda, coulda, shoulda. The other question I have is kind of a technical question for the architect. I was a little concerned when you were saying 2 levels of parking underground, or below ground, or at ground level. Because I don't think that parking garage, I thought it only had 1 level underground, or it was when they built it. And one of the concerns, of course, is the groundwater.
Right. So
Are you talking about putting 1 level and maybe raising up?
No. So buildings 1, 2, and 3 all have, what do you call them? They're under building parking garages that on the front of the buildings, as the buildings face the road, they're completely below
Invisible.
grade.
Right.
But on back sides of the building, they're exposed because the topography is dropping. And that may be the case when we start looking at some of these buildings. They may have similar opportunity. We know the parking garage, that's the way the parking garage, the first level is half subterranean. It's not fully submerged.
Right.
Right now, what we're saying is we think we need to have at least 1 level of parking underneath these buildings, and maybe 2, depending on how it goes. We understand that if we go more, it's going to cost a lot more. We don't want to go 2.
Okay, I just.
But
I just wanted-
it
I
would-
just wanted
it would
to
cost a lot
clarify
more to
my
do
mind
it.
what you were saying. Okay,
Mhm.
that's it. Any other commissions have any other questions? Ray?
Just a follow-up on that question. So whatever the parking requirement, if you run into the water table,
Yeah.
if you start going underground, why could you not go into the parking garage that you have? Add a few more levels. I'm not, I can't remember whether we, there's some option that you may be able to add a couple more floors on
They
that.
said they
So-
could, they
Right.
could
They
do
can?
2. They could do 2.
Oh, okay. Oh,
We have
sorry.
already designed and built the
Mhm.
garage to accommodate 2 more levels.
Oh, okay.
So all the steel, all the concrete is already in the building to handle 2 more floors.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
That's it. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We'll adjourn at 5 to 10.
Oh, Chris,
Oh,
there was
we
one
got
more
one more
agenda
thing. We
item.
have more. We got some housekeeping business for commission members, so the stuff that you guys might be interested in. Or you're welcome to stay and see how we conduct our elections. The chairman's not here, so he'll probably get elected.
Well, I'm Christopher Wright with the Development Services Department, and as you see on the agenda, we have the election of officers on the agenda. And you certainly can, you absolutely can do the election of officers tonight if you're ready and willing and able. It is admittedly a little awkward with the chair not being here. So, like I said, you can do the elections if you want. We know that we have another meeting in 2 weeks, and Unfortunately, Randy won't be here for that one either.
Then for sure he gets elected.
But we could, in the meantime, try and get a hold of him. I don't know how accessible he is, but at least to ask him if he'd be willing to serve if elected. So I'll kind of leave it up to you on whether you want to do it tonight or try to talk to Randy, spend these 2 weeks campaigning and lobbying.
We have met so infrequently that I don't know if Randy's willing. I'll try to contact him by email, see if he's willing to go another year. And I would go another year as the assistant, I'd be able to keep the same slate for another year. I'm sorry, we're gonna keep the same slate for another year maybe, or I'll try to get hold of Randy and see if he agrees, and then we can talk about it. You guys think about it, or when do you wanna put your, write-in candidate for Ray?
I think what you have is fine.
Yeah.
So, I'll try to get hold of him.
Yeah.
Sorry, why don't we I'll make a proposal tonight, or make a nomination that we extend the roles of each person for another year. We'll try to get hold of Randy and confirm that next.
That's fine, we can do that, we can vote next week, but I'd like to give him at least the option to say,
Yeah.
no, I'm too busy now signing books or something, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to resign or something, so. Is that agreeable with everyone?
I'm fine with
And we need to make sure everybody's term is still good.
Yeah,
Right.
we're fine.
Yeah,
Well,
your position, it's May, so
Okay,
we've got some time.
I'm good. I'm good with
On that line, on a personal note, is my term extended? I haven't gotten anything in writing yet.
I would have to look. I mean, this past spring, we went through the,
Yeah, I
bringing
never
on the
heard
new
anything,
members. And
I never heard.
yeah, we look at that every
anything
spring is
either.
when we evaluate whether people need to be renewed or not, and we let you know if you do.
Anything, Mel?
Oh,
You get anything?
well, she has a letter.
No, I didn't know if I was up or not. I don't know.
If you didn't hear
I
anything.
just show up.
I'd ask the staff to check and make sure everybody's still,
I think the pay's the same, right?
but I hear that if we extend, everybody gets a raise.
We'll double your salary.
Actually, if you look in your packets,
Yeah.
I don't have the document here. so I'm
You're
gonna
good
come
for
up and join Carl for a
215,
minute.
Randy's 215.
If you look in your packets on the second page, it has everyone's terms. This is a printout from the website.
My packet didn't have that page.
Well, that's just weird.
That's because it's,
They like me better?
no, they didn't,
Yeah,
they didn't
yeah.
print on both
Oh.
sides.
She has it.
I got it for some reason.
Yeah, you didn't do your homework.
So I don't put the packets together, but I
Yeah,
will
yeah.
make sure it's in the next packet.
I didn't see that.
So I'll read this out. Michael is 2015,
Randy's
Randy is
15.
2015, Mel is 2016, Carl is 2016, Ray is 2018, Richard is 2018, and Katie is 2018.
Okay, so Carl will try and get a hold of Randy in the next week
Yeah.
or two, and we'll plan on doing the actual voting at our next meeting.
Yeah, next meeting, after the next meeting.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything else for the good of the order? If not, we're adjourned.
Yeah. I want to say Lucy did a great job in her
Yeah,
presentation.
very good,
It was
Lucy. Thank
excellent.
you.
Thank you, yeah. No, it's great.
Wow, double